Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You're listening to the What's Happening Muslim show brought to you by the Islamic Vibes podcast, and I'm your host Majid. If you find this content beneficial, then please share it with your family and friends. And it goes without saying, please don't forget to subscribe and follow the Islamic Vibes podcast. Today, I'm joined by some very special brothers, the usual clan. Brother Rash and Brother Afi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers.
Wa alaikum
Walaikum
assalam wa
assalam
rahmatullahi wa
wa
barakatuh.
rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
How are you guys?
Oh, good, thanks. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, all good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, no, can't complain. Alhamdulillah. Things are going well. Things are just slowing down work-wise and stuff because of Christmas and
That
it
time of
seems
year,
like
really,
a
isn't
bit,
it?
well, it sounds a bit like Groundhog Day with all this, Omicron, whatever it is, this new virus
Yeah.
variant. So I can't, I'm just waiting for the Unicron variant because we need Optimus Prime to come to sort that one out. If you know, well, if you know, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So inshallah, let's get into the podcast, guys. And what I want to speak about is an issue to do with Saudi Arabia and also to do with Lewis Hamilton, which you think there's not really much of a link between Lewis Hamilton and Saudi Arabia. Now, for those who don't know, Lewis Hamilton is a F1 racing driver, okay? And this year, the F1 was taken to Saudi Arabia as well, so one race in Saudi Arabia. Now, before the race, Lewis Hamilton made a few comments. And what I want to do is I want to read those comments out so that, if people haven't seen it on the news, they know what we're talking about. And then inshallah ta'ala, get your thoughts on this and we can discuss this further. So what basically Lewis Hamilton said, he said he was not comfortable racing in Saudi Arabia. Okay. And these are the comments that he made. He said, "Do I feel comfortable here? I wouldn't say I do. But it's not my choice to be here. The sport has taken the choice to be here. If anyone wants to take the time to read the law, read what the law is for the LGBTQ plus community, it's pretty terrifying. There's changes that need to be made. For example, women's rights of being able to drive legally in 2018, it's how they are policed. Some of the women are still in prison from driving many, many years ago. So there's a lot of changes that need to happen, and I think our sport needs to do more. It's ridiculously complex scenario of culture, religion, beliefs, this regime and rulers, because it's so much different to the world we've grown up in. What I truly believe is that everyone should have human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and there are places where that's not allowed. There are places such as here where for the LGBTQ plus community, there's prison time, death penalty, and restrictions from people for being themselves, and I don't believe in that. Religions can change, rules can change, rulers can change those things. They have the power to. We don't choose where we're going. Others have chosen for us to be here, but we have to apply the pressure on them to make sure they are doing right by the people in those places, sparking conversation, creating that uncomfortable discussion that is needed in those places. But I hope that whether it's kids here and they're more aware of it, whether it's kids back home that are more aware of the scenarios in places, maybe kids back home in England will be studying more at school and learning more about inclusivity, I hope. Now, as a reaction to this was, the Saudi sports minister, Prince Abdulaziz, he was questioned about the statements of Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, he's probably the biggest star in F1 at the moment. So what he said to Sky Sports is, we fully recognize the rights of all individuals to put their point of view and to talk about things. I think once people come to Saudi and they'll see Saudi what it really is, they'll change their minds and see that the country is evolving. The country is moving fast towards a developed country for the future, and we want to fix these things. There are a lot of things we need to take step by step to do the right things. but we also have our culture, we have our history that we want to preserve. We don't want to lose that. So what are your comments, brothers? Let's have a discussion on this, inshallah. What were your thoughts on what Lewis Hamilton was saying, and also probably more interestingly, your thoughts on the response by the Saudi sports minister. Afi, what were your thoughts on this, bro?
Oh yeah, it's funny because I was watching the qualifying at the time, and then Lewis Hamilton comes up, and to be honest, it made me laugh because I was laughing at the irony. Oops, sorry, disappeared there. I was laughing at the irony of his statements and the sheer contradiction of what this guy was saying. First of all, I don't know how elite sportsmen automatically become experts in diplomacy and foreign affairs. So that was the first thing that, where did his expertise on these issues come in from when you don't even understand the way of life in your own country, yet alone that of another group of people that you've got absolutely no knowledge about, and yet you're trying to comment on this. But let's look at some of the things he said. He goes, I'm not comfortable with what's happening here with regards to, well, he claims that there's a certain group of people being oppressed, yet he's very, very comfortable driving in the UK and in the US, where, their whole mantra is to suppress any opinion which contradicts the concept of secularism. So automatically the persecution that Muslims are facing here, the comments are being made about Muslims here from elite politicians, he seems to be okay with. Yet when you're going to another country where they've got their own way of life that the people believe in. So he was talking about these freedoms. So we don't agree with the concept of freedom of speech, but what he was advocating was people allowing to be what they choose to be. So the people in Saudi Arabia and I'm not endorsing this, by the way, I'm just trying to highlight the contradiction of what he was trying to say. So he was saying that here's a group of people who believe in a certain rule, believe in certain ideas, yet he's got a problem with this and trying to impose them on this group of people. So, let's look a bit closer to home. And, if you really believe in these ideas, then you got to, endorse these with a little bit more consistency, because we blatantly know what the US and the Americans have done, where he's comfortable going and, endorses them, loves the people, loves the country. Yet, the amount of people that they've killed in the name of freedom, purely because they're killing them because they've opposed these concepts that he claims to be standing for. So that was the first thing I was thinking of, and I find it quite funny how people buy into it. Where who made him an expert on it? This guy isn't even an expert on the Black Lives Matters movement, which he endorsed without actually realizing what that group stands for.
Yeah. No, that's some valid points there.
Yeah, I found it ironic as well, really. If you think about the irony is that, this is a nation also, when like recently, I think we talked about it as well with the Newcastle takeover as well, obviously with the Saudis involved with that. It's just really ironic that when it comes to filling their pockets, having these deals with whoever it is, whether, human rights abusers or whatever, when it's towards their convenience, it's fine. But then what they're trying to do is put pressure on these nations or these countries in the international media. And again, I think the Western powers, they understand that nowadays these influencers, and Lewis Hamilton is an influencer because obviously he's like the most well-known F1 driver. So when someone like him says this, other people can say this and it's kind of, maybe not mainstream news, headline news. When someone like him says it, it has a more of an impact. So we know, and we've discussed about the whole Saudi Vision 2030 and all of these things and reforms in Saudi Arabia. And maybe we can even discuss some of the new reforms in the UAE. But the way I look at it is it's ironic and similar to what Afi says, is that, when it comes to their own advantage, they're willing to have events in these countries. They're willing to let Saudi take over at Newcastle, yet at the same time they're trying to expose things that they're doing themselves. When it comes to human rights abuses, yes, okay, they bring up the Khashoggis in, and we know that what they did, and it's been in international media. But what about all of the human rights abuses that Israel are carrying out? What about all the human rights abuses they themselves have done in Afghanistan? And again, that's even assuming we, consider their term human rights as being some kind of benchmark, which we question ourselves as well. So that's why I found the whole thing very ironic that they utilized, or someone like Lewis Hamilton was talking about this kind of thing.
Thing as well is, there's always, you might have heard it where people say, if for those who come to the West, then, just say you have to accept the way things are. You have to accept the culture. You have to accept the values. You can't try to come across as being someone who's trying to change something, right? If you don't like it, then leave. Now, obviously, this guy has now gone to Saudi, for example, and he's talking about some of the rules there. And in reality, he has said, look, to be honest with you, if, I didn't want to come here, we had to come here. If it was up to me, I wouldn't come here, right? But nevertheless, it seems like people, when it comes down to the issue of Islam or Muslims, there's an accusation that we want to change their way of life, as in like how society manages itself. But when someone is talking about how society manages itself in a Muslim country, as an example, no one sees the hypocrisy. But okay, Lewis Hamilton said, he said what he has. Fair enough, right? He's, maybe he feels that strongly about it. In regards to the response, though, because if you look at what the minister, the Saudi sports minister said, what he said was, I think once people come to Saudi and they'll see Saudi what it really is, they'll change their minds and see that the country is evolving. First word, evolving.
Yeah.
The country is moving fast towards a developed country for the future. Now, the last thing what did he say? He said, and we want to fix these things.
Yeah.
Somebody might say, well, he might be talking about something else, but here we're specifically talking about the comments of Lewis Hamilton, which were mainly heavily towards the issue of LGBT. Now, when he's saying we want to fix these things, where does that? I mean, that's more concerning than what Lewis Hamilton is saying. He can say what he wants, but here you have the Saudi sports minister who's talking about basically changing things in the society so that these things are not a problem. Yeah. So
it's just putting pressure on. That's what it is. It's that pressure, and the response from the sports minister is just highlighting the fact that they're in a process of making changes and reforms, and Lewis Hamilton coming out with this is that extra added pressure that they now need to come out and justify it. So if Saudi thought from the beginning that, okay, we can go about doing whatever we want and we can still throw kind of scholars and stuff in prison, but we can on the outward side carry on having some reforms that the West is happy with, then they could get away with it. But they know that the screw is going to continue to turn and these reforms will continue to happen. So they're feeling the pressure. And again, to highlight, just to clarify, I think, is that this is not to defend the Saudis either, is it? Is, at the end of the day, we'd call out the hypocrisy, but even Saudi isn't a model Islamic nation. It's far, far, far from it. So this is not about defending, but it's highlighting both the hypocrisy, but also the fact that these reforms that are happening are also steered by the Western powers as well, because they want to use some of these nations as model nations that they want to be blueprints for other Muslim countries in the region. Yeah, I mean, some of the things that Lewis, our old boy Lewis said, things like, religions can be changed, rules can be changed, and the rulers have the power to do this. So at the end of the day, he's speaking his mind, but like you said, he is definitely seen as a role model. And I'll tell you something, another thing which is really interesting, I'll get your thoughts on it as well, right? Was there were comments made by the F1 CEO. His name is Stefano Dominicelli. I think that's how you would probably pronounce it, right? You put your Italian accent.
Yeah, you had to, otherwise it would sound really weird, right? Now, what he said was, this was him speaking to Sky Sports F1 ahead of the Qatar GP, which was 2 weeks ago. This is really important now. It's really good to get your thoughts on this, right? He said that there was now no excuse for hosts of the Grand Prix not to improve their human rights records, as he explained why the sport should speed up the progress. Now, check out what he said. He said, as soon as these countries choose to be under the spotlight that F1 is bringing, there's no excuses. They have taken the route of change, right? As always in life, you cannot pretend that millennial cultural habits can be changed from day to night. It would be illogical and not rational. But I think that through F1 and sport, Formula One and sport, they will have the intensity to make sure that the progress will be done in a faster time and in a faster way than it normally would to make these changes. I do believe that in a couple of years that someone will recognize the important role that F1 has given to this opportunity, important change to society. Now, there's loads that you can unpack from there, right? You can see here he's talking about, you know, it being a generational change, the fact that it's not going to change overnight. But what's important is he's saying that, look, when these countries have chosen to be within F1, they've actually taken the route of change. I would say the same thing applies, for example, to like the Qatar World Cup 2022, right? So in a way, what you can say is the fact that these countries would have to be extremely naive to think that they can host these, you know, international sporting events and not have to change anything within their countries, right? And also, could it well be that, you know, this is a way of actually using sport to bring in the change, right? And I'm not even just talking about from external factors. I'm talking about even from the governments, the rulers themselves are using sports as a way of then bringing this change. Now, you know, like Qatar, for example, when they won the right to host the World Cup in 2022, the normal Qatari people must be over the moon. Like, you know, they're not going to be secular and stuff, but they'll be happy that, yeah, we're holding the World Cup, right? Now, through this, as you know, they've already said, I think they've said things like alcohol will be allowed. And I think even to do with like same-sex relations or something like this, you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, right? So they've already eased up things. So here, what we're seeing is that these countries, by them accepting F1, bringing in WWE, bringing in concerts, yeah, we're saying on one hand that they feel under pressure to make these changes, but actually, to me, it seems like they're as involved as the people that are pushing this from the West. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's where my head was going at while you were talking, because the precedent has already been set with the Qatar World Cup. And in fact, you quoted the FIA, you know, CEO, and a similar comment was made yesterday after Lewis's comments, where someone as seniors turned around and said, look, you know, when a country agrees to host a tournament like an event like this, they agree to the scrutiny and what comes with it and their commitment to make these changes. So the Saudi government, Qatar, and, you know, Bahrain, they all agree to this. So this goes to show that actually what they're trying to do, the governments have already bought into it. And let's be honest, you know, why wouldn't they? This is the life that they want to live. You know, the stories you hear or the news reports that you hear about bin Salman on his decadent holidays with his friends in Maldives, where they're bringing in, you know, pure corruption to an island and in a closed environment, and then they close off their media not to report it back to their people. So, you know, this is the way of life that they want to live and are committed to changing, but what's holding them back is the public opinion. So what are they using to change that public opinion? They are hoping is sport, the rewards that come with it, and then say, look, we want to give you these events, we want to host them, we want to change the image of Saudi, but we can't unless we bring these rules in the hope that it changes public opinion. So, you know, they knew very well what they were doing when they started to host these events, committed to it. And then, you know, they're not surprised, but it is aimed at the people, like you said, it's not aimed at the governments. And just one final point actually on the government and Lewis Hamilton before we continue on this point is, you know, Lewis should go back and check his history and look at who put these regimes in place, who financed them and who created these regimes that he's complaining about now. So perhaps, you know, look a bit closer to home first. But yeah, coming back to your point, you're 100% right. It's aimed at changing that public opinion.
Yeah.
There's a term for it, isn't there? It's called sports washing. they've spoken about it quite a lot recently. So sports washing became more spoken about since this Newcastle takeover as well. It's the whole idea of using sport basically for whitewashing some of these issues that these countries are doing. But there's multiple ways to look at this. There's one way, which is some people are going that Saudi are doing the sports washing, or Qatar are doing the sports washing by going, look, we're inclusive, we bought your football clubs, we want to be part of you, blah, blah, blah. Look at us in a positive light. But the flip side of it is, it's actually the Western world, through their diplomatic means and these political means, they want to actually bring these nations in via this sports medium, and then being able to change them. Someone I listened to, I think it was a podcast, and it was a Gary Neville podcast or something, and he talked about this because he was saying that I despise some of the things that are happening in Saudi, you know, in terms of human rights abuses and stuff, but I'd rather be one of those people who engage in discussion with them rather than pushing them to be outliers, you know. So he said, look, a lot of people don't want the takeover of Newcastle by, you know, people affiliated with the Saudi regime, but I'd rather them take over and then be able to be close enough to them to have a discussion about reforms and change, rather than the other approach, which is you castigate them, you throw them out, and therefore there's forever a clash. So this just highlights the strategy of sports washing from a Western narrative, not from the narrative of some of these regimes, where it's actually what they're trying to do is go, actually, we'll bring you in and your populations will appreciate it because they'll be able to, you know, take part in these sporting events and things. But at the same time, we'll force certain policies on you. And it's linked to, I think there was a survey done a few years ago, maybe like 5-6 years ago. And the irony of this survey is they promoted it in the wrong way, in my opinion. So the survey came out saying that 50% of the young Arabs want to leave their countries, and quite a few of them said they wanted to go to the likes of, you know, Dubai and Abu Dhabi and some of the UAE and Saudi, and places where they felt that, okay, we might be able to live a more like liberal lifestyle, but or engage in some more of these sports and things like that. And they tried to promote it that way, but without highlighting that a lot of the reasons some of these people want to leave is because of the Western foreign policy in some of these places, you know, the likes of Kuwait and stuff like that, and Qatar and wherever. Yeah. So I think this whole sports washing thing is quite important here. And that's why, whether Lewis Hamilton did it off his own back, or whether, you know, some of these people, what happens is, you know, their advisors, people advise them of what things to speak about. A sports person doesn't naturally come out speaking about these political things without some degree of guidance before. Okay, maybe once in a while you could argue that, but I think more often than not, they tend to get told that don't speak about these things. It could have a negative effect on your brand and your reputation. So better to not say anything than to say anything at all, and leave that to the politicians, etc. So when a sports person does come out and speak about these things, it always sounds fishy to me. There's always an ulterior motive and an agenda.
Right. Yeah, to be honest, I personally saw it as just, you know, the guy is a big star and he just felt his boots are big enough to make comments like this. And but you're right, to be honest with you, a lot of these advisors, even when in football, you get footballers tweeting and stuff. It's not actually them tweeting.
Exactly.
They have like PR company who does the tweeting for them. But at the end of the day, I think what's important for the listeners to take away is that, you know, I think it goes back to what Rash was saying also, the fact that, look, we're not here to defend the Saudi regime and all that. We're here to talk about Islam, and it's not even an issue that this is targeting Saudi Arabia as such, specifically or only, right? Here is targeting Islam. Why Saudi is important is because the way it's seen in the world. As Muslims, we have to understand that Islam is perfect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that today I perfected your deen. So when something is perfect, you know, it cannot be improved. Okay, it cannot be reformed. It cannot be made better. So when there are calls for things to change, for things to be tweaked. As Muslims, we have to understand that this is a red line for us. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that, when Allah and His Messenger decide on a matter, it's not up to the believing men or women to have any say in this, or like, oh, well, actually, I think this is better, or I think that is better, or times have changed, and is this even relevant anymore? That's not the case. This is from the Creator. So as Muslims, the important thing is the fact that, what's being talked about here is Islam being changed and reformed to bring it up to the standards that have been set by liberalism and secularism. Because the standards that have been set by liberal and secularism, it's like as if they've made them the global standards. Okay, they're right. So if you want to be progressing, if you want to be progressive, then you need to get closer towards this standard. If you're moving away from this standard, then you're regressing, you're not progressing, right? So I think that's why we're talking about this, and that's the key thing to take away, that this is the attack. And Rash, you mentioned the issue to do with the UAE, the fact that it's the biggest change being announced in UAE law in history, right? And when they say history, UAE is 50 years, it's going to be 50 years old, right? They talk as if they had got the history of the Persians and stuff. No, it's only 50 years colonial state, right? But tell us a bit more about, because I think there's definitely a link, because you got this stuff that's been pushed into Saudi, these things are being made, and at the same time, you got UAE announcing that they're going to have the biggest change in UAE law. Just build on that, bro.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to discuss UAE, because I actually think UAE are more of the blueprint and the framework that they want for the region. So these laws you're talking about, they're as part of their, year of the 50, as you said, they call it the year of the 50 because they've been around for 50 years. And anybody who listens to that bit in itself should wonder why they've only been there for 50 years and probably question that first and foremost. And we can go back in history and discuss that. But some of these reforms are very, very dangerous. They've been spoken about for a while. They tried to cover them in trade and economic reform, but under the hood, there are a lot of social reforms. So there's a number of laws, and they link to things like, allowing men and women who are not married to live together. So these are all social laws from the Islamic system, the Islamic civilization, that they're trying to weed out and in its place put liberal laws and Western laws. So be that being able to be in a relationship outside of wedlock, cohabiting outside of wedlock, be that alcohol consumption in public places, be that legalizing suicide, be that more women's rights, increasing women's rights. They're made to sound positive because the framework people look at things is liberalism and Westernism, but the Muslim should look at them and go, actually, what you're trying to do is get rid of any Islamic laws and get rid of the foundation that is Islam, and the way people live is based on Islam. You want to remove that and put liberalism in its place. And by throwing words like women's rights in there, it makes it immediately appear that by removing the Islamic laws, you're bringing in equality for women. In fact, what you're doing is, by saying the woman can therefore, have sexual relations outside wedlock, you're introducing their corruption into our lands. And this happening in UAE is highlighting that region, they want to further progress towards liberal values, Western secular values, and further away from Islamic values and Islamic laws. Yeah.
And just to add that, come to you, Afi, is that what we have to understand is that certainly in the Arab lands, and rather Hijaz and the UAE and stuff like this, I think we obviously know that there's no Islamic state. Okay, there's no Khilafah, right? However, what we can see is that even after the Ottoman state was, abolished in 1922 and 1924, what we see is that the Arabs, they had known no other way of living, no system of living other than Islam. So that just continued. So things to do with how society was managed, the issues to do with the free mixing and the women and the mahram rule and stuff like this, these were there. So when Russia is saying that they're trying to change Islamic rules, even though they don't implement Islam, these rules come from the Islamic social system. And I think that's an important point, just to clarify, just to add on to what Rash is saying. Afi, any thoughts, bro?
Yeah, just to add to that, and in full agreement with what Rash has said, I think what you need to take home from what Rash has said is, in these Arab countries, like you said, Islam wasn't being implemented. They applied a flavor of Islam just to give a sweetener to the people, because it reflects the thoughts that the people carry. And despite not a full understanding of Islam as a comprehensive system, one thing that the majority of Muslims in the Arab countries do understand is the social system of Islam. And they even in Dubai, well, UAE unfortunately is synonymous with Dubai, but it's bigger than that. It's a collection of emirates, and Dubai is seen as a bit of an outlier by the residents of some of the other emirates as well, because they see it as artificial. It's there as a playground for the West, and most of the people from UAE, as in the natives, live in the other emirates, and in there it's a bit of a different flavor. So you go to Abu Dhabi, you go to Sharjah, and the flavor is different. You can see that it's beginning to creep in, but the flavor is different from the people. And the residents of there would just come into Dubai when they need to, primarily for shopping, etc., and then go back.
Okay.
And you see that even these people will regard Dubai as being an outcast, as in, this is us, this is not our lifestyle. Our lifestyle is what we live here with our family, with our friends, the way we interact. And the same thing in Saudi. So if you look in Saudi, the women in Saudi who were covered in full niqab, where's the outcry being from them? Even though people may disagree or agree with niqab, it doesn't matter, but the women themselves feel like, look, this is me. If you speak to the people of Saudi with regards to why women aren't driving and are women allowed to drive, no one's ever said, look, women can't drive. They're protecting the role of the woman by saying, we don't want them to drive, in order to put them in a situation where there's a crash and an argument, that they're exposed to this non-mahram situation and left on their own. So you see that the people, and what's it there to do? It's there to protect the social system. So what they're trying to do now with these rules is attack the essence of the social system, which protects the relationship between man and woman. UAE is a massive. UAE is a good example, because although the generation that we're talking about don't feel like that, don't see the issue, and are going to adhere to the rules that are from Islam, because that's what they've been doing, or at least to the rules of their understanding, by bringing something into law. And the way that they're justifying it is because the foreigners, the tourists who are coming in, half aren't married, there's some homosexuals there. And recently, I think it was going back a couple of years ago, there was a couple who were arrested for relations outside of marriage, and they were tourists, and it created a bit of an outcry in the international media, but not from the locals. So these laws are designed, and they're bringing him in through the back door, if you like, no pun intended, to show the fact that we're doing it for the tourists, and we have to, because they don't follow our rule. But once they become law, it starts to create a precedent and something to indoctrinate the people with as generations continue.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is that they may say that the laws are designed for the foreigners, but if this law is law, isn't it? How are you
Exactly.
going to differentiate? And so people turn and say, well, this inequality. Why can they live together without out of wedlock, but we can't?
Yeah.
If someone's arrested, if a Muslim's arrested for it and they go to court, what are they going to do? Well, actually, the law says I'm allowed to. So what's your problem?
Yeah. And these kind of things are generational. Remember, sometimes like someone will argue and say, some of these laws aren't even implemented, like the cohabitation law. That someone will argue and say, this law's been in there for a long time, that you're not allowed to live together if you're not married. But they'll say that people have been living together when they're not married. So these laws, even though they're there, they're not enforced. Yeah. However, the irony around that, or not even irony, the issue around that is that even if they're not enforced, they're known about, and they're part of what people see as being, this is Islam. Yeah. As soon as you remove this, even if it's not enforced, in a number of generations' time, or even in another generation's time, the new way of living, living out of wedlock in a house together, without marriage, all of a sudden becomes normalized. And then before you know it, in the future generations, they look back and what the original people used to think all of a sudden is not in the psyche of the population. And that's what makes, when they say generational wars, generational intellectual and psychological wars, that's what this kind of thing is. And that's what worries me the most.
And I think for someone to say it's not going to make a difference is extremely, extremely naive, because I think if we look at it from ourselves living in the West, we know that there were certain goings on in society or the communities at a certain level that we get influenced at, but it's not on a great level when we were growing up. But as the boundaries start to be pushed out further, it impacts on the behavior of our communities as well. So now if you've got this kind of stuff happening in our countries and it starts to creep in, it may start up slow, so the point that you don't see, it's a bit like boiling water, you don't really see the effect until the water starts boiling. But once there's evidence of it and it's condoned, or be it legally, it's just going to mean that it's going to expand even further.
Another quick point is these kind of these all things are incentivized as well from different levels. So we talked about the sports washing side, and the same applies to the likes of UAE. But what they do is they incentivize it by going, look, now we'll make you inclusive in sport, but then you have to look at the F-35 deal as well. Previously, the F-35 fighter jet made by the US was only going to be given to Israel in the Middle East. Okay. In terms of in the Middle East, obviously other of their allies can have it, but in the Middle East, they were only going to sell it to Israel. And then subsequently, the Abraham Accords and, the normalizations between some of these Arab nations and Israel occurred. And then now the likes of UAE now have purchased, and that agreement has been, after Trump went out, that deal that was done by Trump has been ratified, and UAE now are allowed to buy the F-35 fighter jet. So can you see there's incentives to doing some of this? And what I've found a quote. It's by US Assistant Secretary of State Myra Resnick, and what she said was, we continue consulting with Emirati officials to ensure we have unmistakable, clear mutual understanding with respect to Emirati obligations. And here's the key bit: Emirati obligations and actions before, during, and after delivery. So they're saying, before we give you the F-35s, we have certain preconditions. When we give you them, we have conditions. But even after we've given them to you, you have certain conditions you need to conform by. And part of those is you need to liberalize, you need to secularize, you need to come in line with the modern world, alongside other things like, the way you interact with the likes of China and stuff. So there's a whole political dimension to all of these things. So really key thing not to just go, okay, look, UAE, we know their leaders are not Islamic, they're trying to implement liberal laws, but look at how the Western powers are pushing them and making sure they carry out these strategies that are, concocted in Washington, in the White House.
I think also, 100%, Rashan, and that's why when you talk about rulers and authority, it just goes to show how the authority in countries is so important. Because, like if just say you had an Islamic authority, then you have individuals that are entering the lands and trying to spread these ideas. Yeah, you're not too worried because the authority will preserve the society. Here, what you've got the authority, which is actually, the main component in promoting these ideas for the West, right? So what happens is that in the current generation, there may be people who resent this, but in the generations to come, because it's coming from the authority, the strongest faction, you could probably, someone will argue, within the society from a power point of view, okay, you could see how initially they will threaten, they will scare, they will arrest the ulama, they will do this, right? Then they'll bring in these games, right? They may even show economic benefit to people, right? Through these games and through this, whether it's Vision 2030, or whether it's that city, Neon City, right? So here what you've got is you've got many stages. First of all, you clamp down on the people who are against it. Then you wow the people, right? Similar to how in Rome, if you ever do Roman history, how one of the main reasons for the Colosseum and all these games and stuff was to distract the people, right? So you bring this in, and then you hope that the future generations will take it in. And that's why the rulers are so important in this thing. The authority is so important, because the reality is that they all sellouts. I mean, just look at what's happening in Jordan, yeah, with the deal that's made with the illegal entity to do with the water and the energy, right? And with that one, to be honest, that deserves a podcast in itself, because people should question the fact that Jordan, the authorities themselves have placed themselves in this situation where they've got problems for water scarcity, right? It's their own fault, right? Then you've issue, for example, with Macron. He just performed a Gulf tour. This is the guy who was pointing out there's a problem with Islam. This is the guy whose government was, projecting images supposedly of the Messenger Sallallahu, right, insulting images, cartoons, right, and this is the guy who's now been to all these UAE and just finished meeting Bin Salman, and he's met these countries, done deals, and this all hunky-dory. So as Muslims, what we have to understand is, the biggest problem that we have in this region are these authorities and all these rulers. And now, until these rulers and this authority isn't changed, what you're going to see is, you're going to see how maybe in the past you had some rulers who were dictators, but they knew that if they went down a certain alley for America, certain reforms, right, their own survival was at risk. Now you're getting these new generation type of rulers like Bin Salman. I'm sure it's going to happen in other places, where these guys now, they're not that afraid. They will lock up the ulama. They will show the failure of the Arab Spring and show what happened in Syria for those people who stand up to governments. That template is there now. So what you've got is, you've got these guys now who will perform the most ridiculous reforms for the West. So I just want to just point that out, the fact that the biggest problem here is the authorities, is these rulers, and it is them who is allowing these false and erroneous and evil ideas and concepts to actually make any headway within the society of the Muslims.
Yeah, I think they're the only problem, if you like, because if you look at the tools that they're using with everything that's going on in Saudi and the examples you gave about the UAE and Qatar, they're using state apparatuses to show that this is our stance, but the people are behind this stance because they're not presenting an alternative view. They're trying to show everything hunky-dory. So, even in Formula One, when they're showing, that the Formula One is being greeted by the residents of Jeddah. So, but when you look at what is being said on social media by the people from these countries, there's a whole different stance there. So it goes to show that actually it is the rules that are the problem. There is what's the word? Animosity, discontent, or whatever towards the regimes for what they're doing, but there isn't a resistance through action from the Muslims. And I think this is where it becomes dangerous. Yeah, you can disagree with it, you can be vocal on it. And even on the comments by Lewis Hamilton and the Saudi government, if you look at even on likes on LinkedIn, apart from government employees or those in really high places, the reaction to the people when they're trying to place LGBT and oneness together and showing that Muslims and LGBT are one, they're getting really a massive backlash from the people. But it's easy to marginalize these because on television, interviews and everything, you're showing there's no resistance. These are just extremists or whatever who hold this viewpoint. And I think this is where it becomes dangerous, because unless you come out, so that my message to the Muslims in Saudi, UAE, are saying, if you don't agree with what's going on, this can't happen unless you are vocal about what's going on. It requires the people to make that change. And they're only comfortable making these changes because they know you're not going to do anything.
Yeah, but what I would say to that though is, it's obviously a process, because the people will argue that if if and rightly so, to be honest with you, that if they've been able to arrest heavyweight scholars, ulama in Saudi, for example, like heavyweight, I mean, people who you would have thought are untouchable, then what do you think they can do to the normal person? So it's a really tricky situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're right. Sorry, Rashkan.
No, I don't want to be too negative because it comes across that way. Yeah, because you're right. Even in the likes of Afghanistan, I think recently some media stations, really small Islamic ones, have tried to put forward the view of some of the niqabis and people who are on the ground in Afghanistan and gone, look, some people are more than happy to live like this, but the media shows it as those people are oppressed. The media never shows their opinion. The media just shows the opinion of those going, oh, the Taliban's taking our rights. It always shows the secular Muslims or the liberal Muslims, and then the whole world looks out from the outside and thinks, oh, okay, that must be all Muslims in Afghanistan must be unhappy. But that's not the case at all. So it's negative in that it's very difficult because the correct view of the people on the ground and what the Muslims wanting Islam is never propagated in the mainstream media. But really, we shouldn't expect that because the mainstream media is controlled by the superpowers of today. So the positive way we should look at it is, yes, these rulers are enforcing these things over the people, but people on the ground have opposing views. The issue is we need to speak to them, we need to keep them motivated and for them to continue, because at the end of the day, we have Islam. It's not some other foreign idea that we're trying to bring to the top and for that to be implemented once again. We're talking about Islam, which is the haqq, which is the truth, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised will be, dominant once again. So that in itself should give us confidence, even if today we are in that situation where it feels like sometimes there's no hope.
And just to add to what Rash you're saying, is when they're trying to bring in these concepts into Saudi or UAE, it shouldn't be the Muslims from outside these countries looking at them and saying, oh man, look at you guys are messed up, these are the rules you're putting in. We should feel attacked. That's what's happening. So we should feel attack ourselves as Muslim, because the attack isn't on Saudi Arabia, the attack is on the Islamic rule, like what you guys have been saying. We've got to see this as an attack on ourselves, and the defense we have to be part of. Show these guys, show the people that, look, you are not alone, we are with you. All right, we're not in those countries, but our stance is the same as yours, and we will back you. And the fact is that we're feeling the attack as well as you. So I think it's really, really important not to fall into the trap of attacking Saudi Arabia as a nation of its people, as opposed to the government, like what you've made very, very clear, Maj. We are with the people of Saudi Arabia. The attack is on us. Yes, we know the government is part of it. So how do we as Muslims fight back, and what is the way to fight back?
No, exactly. I mean, if we start looking at these issues via geographical lines and borders, then all we'll ever do is look how bad the Saudis are. Look how, and people do say that, and a lot of them don't have much experience of people from there. But as you know, I mean, you guys have all been there, and you speak to people there. You try and tell me that people are willing, or they're happy with this stuff? Absolutely not. However, like you said, it's a process, and we gotta add to that process. It's not just their problem; it's our problem too.
We shouldn't even blame the ones that are affected by it. The ones that might even come out with some degree of ideas that are against Islam. If you think about it, they're living in this environment where they're being bombarded to change towards the Western narrative. So I think it's wrong to even criticize. Okay, we can tell them this is the truth and what you're saying is incorrect, but we should never make it personal. We should take it as an opportunity to demonstrate that this is Islam. What you're calling for is not Islam, but do it with hikmah in a way that we're not attacking them, because we should appreciate that maybe if we were in their situation and we were being bombarded left, right, and center, we might change our views. It is ironic that we live in a...
Also, Rash, just to add to your point, these places are not establishing Islam.
Exactly.
They're not implementing Islam. So it's not like, it's not like they're going against if they were living in Islamic State.
Exactly.
So it could well be that there's oppression and there's repression, dictatorship under the name of Islam, or religious flavor, and people are fed up, like you're saying, Rash.
We recognize that when Islam is implemented as the deen, as the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the people that live under that, the Muslims and the non-Muslims would become closer to Islam. And then you have people that embrace Islam because of the justice of that system, of the justice of the Sharia. So why are we surprised that when kufr is implemented, that it won't affect Muslims? Of course it will, because the society, the systems, the leaders, the rules, the regulations, those affect their populations. And that should highlight to us the urgent need for Islam, because that's when us as Muslims, but even non-Muslims, will be affected in a positive way to move towards away from all these disgusting liberal ideas which have created all this LGBTQ and all of this kind of way of living and things like that, which we are completely opposed to.
And just to add to Rash, I think you're really you're spot on, because it's made me think about my approach with some of the brothers who come over from there as well, because it's very, very easy to attack them for not doing anything or saying anything, and in some cases to be neutral on the issue is a sign that they're in agreement with you, because in countries like Saudi Arabia, you've got the government doing what they're doing, you've got the media propaganda, but on ground level there is this real scaremongering of the people that's going on. I mean, imagine, how many times have you heard from people there that, in private conversations, they'll talk openly and establish trust with us, and then they've got this mentality that every other person is a government spy. This mentality exists, and I was like, come on, man, you can't do that. And honestly, there's this real scaremongering of the people that's going on, even with students. They're told when they come over, don't talk, keep to yourselves, don't go and mingle with other people, and especially they call it the Pakistani community, but I guess it includes everyone who's not Saudi, because they're scared of the ideas that these guys are going to carry, and they really have this belief in them that, look, we're watching you, we've got someone out there keeping an eye on you. And that's where you'll find in public they'll keep to themselves. In mosque they'll read their Quran, they'll pray, go away, they won't get engaged in group discussions that are going on. Build that relationship up, go and talk to them in private. It's a whole different story.
Some really, really good points, and it just goes to show that you can't generalize. You speak to people, and like what Rash said, and I think that's a really, really important point. The fact that if people are not living under Islam, to think that they won't be affected. So if you do have somebody, like about a month ago, that woman, she's been interviewed at that beach in Jeddah, that non-segregated beach, and she said, "This is like paradise. It feels like I'm in paradise." You know what I mean? You know what? I sort of cussed her, I'll be honest with you. But reality is that you're right, man. It's people have been affected by kufr and these ideas, and everyone needs that guidance. Everyone needs that guidance, and if anything we can do is try to get these ideas out there, so people can see that actually, you know what, people are speaking about this. Muslims around the world are concerned about what's happening in Saudi, not from a nationalistic point of view, from a point of view of Islam. This isn't just our land to do what we want here. This is actually, it belongs to the Ummah. It's their concern too. So now some positive stuff at the end. To be honest with you, stuff that Rash has brought out, some good discussions. But just to sort of bring the podcast to a close and sort of get your final thoughts. Anything else you want to sort of add? Rash, I'll start off with you, bro.
I think that point again, just to reiterate that, look, we shouldn't always be so negative about things. We are suffering difficulties as an ummah, no doubt, but it was never supposed to be easy. Remember, we need to remember that this life is a test, and we live in these comfortable countries. We have we don't have the issues that people in the likes of Syria now have, the winter months, struggles, all of those things. And no doubt we should be helping them. We should do whatever we can, but we should also recognize that those issues have come about because our lands are divided. And to be negative about that and just constantly look for temporary solutions is difficult. We've talked about UAE and these issues happening and in Saudi and stuff, but sometimes I think those things detract from the fact that at the bottom line, we need to be discussing with our brothers and sisters about the lack of Islam being implemented anywhere in the world, not just Saudi and UAE. Saudi and UAE might be those bad examples right now where we're thinking, oh man, look what's happening over there, these liberal ideas. But as long as kufr is implemented, that will continue. But that's why we need to try and undo that. And then that's what we need to focus our efforts on. And like this podcast of yours, that's why I think, when we discuss these ideas, people should go away and go, yeah, this is what's happening in the world and we know about it. But, equally, there are things we can be discussing that will make matters better. And that's why it's important to discuss these Islamic topics as well related to it.
Yeah, well said, bro. Well said. Afi?
Yeah, just to add to what Rash is saying, I think it's so easy to focus on the negatives and have a defeatist mentality, whereas actually focusing on what the kuffar are doing and what the agents of the kuffar are doing, it should actually give us a sense of positivity rather than negativity, because why are they doing it? Muhammad Sallam said, there will come a time when holding on to Islam is going to be feeling like, you're holding on to a hot piece of rock or hot coal. Hold on to it and don't let go. And the attack on Islam, and why it's difficult to hold on to Islam, is because of the intensity of the attack of the non-Muslims and their agents on Islam. And we should ask ourselves, why is the intensity getting greater? And the intensity is getting greater because the Muslims aren't letting go. Yeah. The Muslims aren't letting go of the Iraq. They're holding on to it, and they want to hold on to it, and they want to fight it back. And therefore, the intensity is resulting in torture. And this is no different to what happened in the life of Muhammad Sallam and the time of the Sahaba, when Islam started to get established and the Muslims wanted to take it further and live according to Islam. The attacks of the kuffar got greater. And we should look at what's happening now positively, but have that mindset that we're not going to let go.
Yeah, no, bang on, bro. I was chatting to a brother yesterday, actually, and he said, look, Islam doesn't need us to defend it. Islam is Islam, it's the haqq, it's the truth. What it boils down to is what choices we want to make in life. If we want to be active in this game, or if we want to be inactive. Islam is Islam. It's not like, if we don't do anything, Islam is going to come to an end. No. So
what other way of life could have, under this pressure of international, be it intellectual, be it military, be it all of these, everything, media, everything is against Islam, yet Islam is still there. What other way of life could have, been able to, hold its own with all of this attack from so many sides? Nothing other than the truth.
But not even just that. I mean, someone would argue that and also grow. I mean, if you think about it, one of the attacks, I mean, these were meant to be the final thoughts, but this is what I add, that one of the attacks is on women in Islam. But you look in the West, and I think the majority number of converts are women. That doesn't make sense. And that's a fantastic point you're making there, Rash. If you think logically, if you think about it, with under all this pressure, you should be able to get change. You should be able to destroy it. You should do. I mean, in the past, this happened. And that resistance, again, like I was saying, is because of Islam itself. So the choice we need to make is, do we want to get involved? Do we want to have these discussions? Like what Rash said, speak to people about it, increase our understanding on what's going on our deen, on the next generation. If we want to leave some sort of a legacy behind, then you need to work towards that. And, if you want to just be like everyone, like most of the world, certainly in the West, where you're just going to live your life and then just die and that's it. This is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us for. And this is such a waste. It's a waste of fresh air. It's a waste of oxygen. It's a waste of everything. So, some good thoughts to leave the listeners with, Rash. So jazakallah khair for that. So yeah, guys, jazakallah khair again for coming on. Certainly at short notice as well. It was a really, really good discussion. And I've picked up loads as well from that. And what I would say is to everyone, certainly what Rash mentioned about the UAE and their laws, definitely check that out. It looks like they want to make UAE the template to then cross-apply it to other countries. And I think the main target is Saudi because of where it stands in the eyes of the Muslim world. So yeah, jazakallah to you guys, and for all the listeners, at home. I hope you found this episode beneficial. If you did, please share it with your family and friends. And as you know, the Islamic Vibes podcast is available on YouTube under my channel, Path to Revival, and all popular podcast platforms. On that note, my dear brothers, Jazakallah khair once again. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll see you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.